In 2014, Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin created a seismic shift in how we think about reinventing relationships. When they divorced, unlike typical celebrity couples, they chose to work collaboratively in shifting their relationship to one where both could feel joy, fulfill their parenting and financial responsibilities, and continue growing together, but less closely together. Instead of calling this evolution a divorce, they brought the phrase conscious uncoupling into the common American vernacular. Welcome to The Behaviorist with Work Wisdom, where we help you adopt high-performance mindsets, behaviors, communication, and culture. We are your hosts. I'm Sarah Colantonio.
And I'm Kedren Crosby.
Our intention for the Behaviors podcast is to share accessible, concrete practices that you can weave into your whole life to begin a shift toward joy and meaningful achievement. Today, we're talking about that very topic, conscious uncoupling. And so I first want to ask you, Kedren, what exactly prompted this topic discussion?
Great question. I've been thinking a lot about conscious uncoupling in my personal life, as well as in my professional life, because it's a non-dualistic way of moving through relationships. So it's a way that we can not blame, and we can recognize that relationships evolve, and it's not that one person is necessarily good or bad, that one person is at fault, but that our needs change over time. And so in the workplace, I've been particularly frustrated because it seems like modern employment practices don't have any space for this non-judgmental way of evolving out of a job, out of a career even. So I wanted to bring this concept of conscious uncoupling into the workplace. And I think we have, over the last 7 years in our practice, used this pretty well. And so I thought it was just time to write an article, record a podcast, talk about it with some other leaders who might be struggling, who might feel like there needs to be a more modern way of approaching relationships in the workplace.
I'll never forget months ago when we were talking to an employee and we collectively were realizing, this isn't working. And she said, are we consciously uncoupling?
Yeah, she was very funny.
Yeah.
And we did.
So how much control do you believe leaders have over relationships in the workplace?
Well, I think less and less every year. I think leaders, the boss, they like to think that they have lots of control, but the reality is they have very little. They think that, and actually research shows that whoever has the most power in the organization is most contagious with their emotions. And you'd like to think that means that they can be positively contagious in changing the culture and improving morale and meaning and engagement. But everyone in a system is bringing so much into the team dynamics that once you start calculating that, it feels like we have to recognize that we do only have so much control. And so, part of how we manage anxiety and prevent burnout is recognizing what can we control and what can't we control, and then putting our energy where we can control things. So I think, when you think about the fact that every employee, every part of it, every member of a team is bringing their own, honestly, family of origin, organizational cultures of origin that they are bringing from past organizations, their own, joy and engagement and passion and so many more things that once you start calculating the number of contributing factors on even a 5-person team, it becomes increasingly clear that as leaders, we don't have nearly as much control of the relationship as we think we do.
It makes me think about the definition in emotional intelligence of interpersonal relationships and how it's mutually satisfying relationships.
Yeah.
And so maybe in the past, we've thought leaders had more control or more responsibility. And yet, really, at least with emotional intelligence, it has to be mutual. There has to be a two-way give and take.
Well, definitely in the workplace, it needs to be a two-way give and take, mutually satisfying relationship. And so if people are to truly feel valued at work, I think that mutuality is really important. So there's been a lot written about how leaders maybe haven't valued employees. And so I think that we have to recognize it is a two-way street. And so both the leader as well as the member of the team need to be conscious of what they're bringing to the relationship and how they're fueling it, or how they might be diminishing the relationship. Yeah. So it's a different way of thinking about the workplace. But as we think about workplaces becoming increasingly relational, I think it's wise for all of us to think about what is it that we're bringing to make this a mutually satisfying relationship.
Do you happen to have a definition for conscious uncoupling at work?
No, but we should make one. It's a great idea. I think it's something along the lines of noticing what we're contributing and how we're evolving, and noticing when we're flourishing, and noticing when we've moved past flourishing and we're no longer flourishing, and that we choose to move to a place where we believe that we can flourish. And so without blame, being aware of how that relationship has changed, and releasing the other person so that they can be successful. So releasing, it may be that as the employee, I'm releasing the leader so that they can hire someone who feels engaged in the work. Or as a leader, maybe they are releasing that employee so that they can go find where they truly feel they belong and that they can flourish. So that was the longest, most rambling definition I have ever heard. But you can't ask me to make this stuff up on the spot. But yeah, it's something along the lines of that. What do you think? How would you make that even better?
I don't know. I think that your main points make sense. That it's noticing, recognizing what you're contributing, how you're receiving what's coming from the other end, what feels good to you, what feels life draining, and moving forward from that. And I think probably a big part of it too, it has to do with, if it's conscious uncoupling, then being really mindful in that conversation. What about when best plans, best intentions, but hiring, it doesn't work out?
Hiring is perhaps a fairly flawed system. It's a flawed system. So how many stories, have we heard about people who've been hired and they think it's the perfect job, and then they get in it and they're like, I hate this job. This place is not for me. I don't belong. Or the other side of it is you think, I've got the perfect employee and they're going to stay with this company forever and help us be great. And then it turns out to be a poor fit. So hopefully someday someone will invent something even better than behavioral interviewing that increases the likelihood that it's a match made in heaven. But until then, I think we have to be more skillful at uncoupling, and maybe uncoupling quickly. And so recognizing this isn't fitting, maybe recognizing, why is this not fitting? Why is this not working? Definitely making some attempts to ameliorate the misfit. But if that doesn't work, then saying, okay, let's move on. I think about, Zappos, giving those enormous, I forget what it was, $2,000 if you got through the first week and you didn't feel like you were a good fit. And then Netflix, of course, giving these enormous severance packages if it was clear that it wasn't going to be a mutually beneficial relationship and that they weren't really a stunning colleague.
Yeah.
So
what are other times when you would recommend conscious uncoupling, or maybe not recommend it, but you think those are situations where
it's time.
It's time.
Yeah, I think when hiring doesn't work out, and that's a time to think about conscious uncoupling. Sometimes, obviously, hopefully, we're all evolving. So hopefully, our organizations are evolving and getting better and stronger and maybe even bigger and more complicated. But also as individuals, we're evolving and we're growing and we're learning. And so sometimes there's just growth that happens in different directions. And so the relationship has run its course, and either the organization or the person isn't going to be able to fulfill the other one anymore. So maybe they've even been there 10 or 20 years, but maybe it's time that it's no longer mutually satisfying. And so I think with care and diplomacy and loving kindness and all of those things, it can be wise to consciously uncouple then. Sometimes we just realize we don't belong. And or others realize we don't belong. And so 2022 at Work Wisdom, our focus has been on how do we sustainably create cultures of belonging. And so internally and also externally for our clients, we've really focused on cultures of belonging. And I've been grappling with this idea that what happens when we don't belong? What happens when someone on a team simply does not belong in that culture? If a culture is exceptionally clear on their identity, on their archetype, on who they are in the world, on their values, on what winning is for them, they become a pretty potent version of themselves. And so a new person might walk into that culture and say, I'm a thorn here. I'm sticking out and I can't seem to assimilate. And it may be because they don't actually belong. So as hard as that sounds to say sometimes we don't belong in a culture, I think we have to admit it.
I have a perfect story of this.
Okay.
When I was in graduate school, going to the University of Tennessee, I worked at this place called Planet Exchange. It was owned by a lesbian. It was reusable clothes. It was great. But the pay wasn't that good. So I decided...
I'm not surprised.
Well, so I quit that job and I found a waitressing job at a steakhouse, if you can believe it.
So
I'm
the
vegan
vegan
now. At the time, though, I wasn't. But so I started working. It was called the Steakhouse or something like that.
That's a novel name.
A lot of
for a steakhouse.
There's a lot of meat, and so I went in on the weekends. I would work, all day on the weekends. I learned how to open bottles of wine. I learned about, how to serve steaks. 3 months go by. I work the lunch shift, go home, come back to do the dinner shift. The manager pulls me in and says, we're going to let you go. And I was like, oh, what did I do? And he said, you're just not a part of this team. You come in, you do your shift, and then you leave. And that's it.
Okay.
And so I said, you're right. That's all I do. And you know what I did?
What?
I got back in the car. I drove to Planet Exchange. I said, I just got fired from the steakhouse. And they said, welcome back. It was so clear I didn't belong there. But I did belong at the clothing shop.
Interesting.
I stayed there until I graduated and moved back to Pennsylvania.
So that steakhouse manager who said you're just not a part of the team, what was he picking up from you that in micro ways you were you rejecting belonging? Like, were you rejecting assimilating into that culture?
I didn't.
No shame.
I think it was probably pretty normal to stay after your shift, have a beer, have some food, maybe go out after. I didn't do any of that. I did my shift. I did my closing duties. I left. I wasn't mean to anyone.
No,
I promise.
I'm sure you weren't.
But I didn't make any friends. I just I was especially nice to the cooks, but that was it. I just in, out, home.
Interesting.
I was focused on school, but that wasn't enough to be on that serving staff.
It might be another podcast talking about belonging and what happens when we don't belong. Yeah. But I think that can be, if you join an organization where they have a really strong culture of creativity or a really strong culture of assertiveness even, and you aren't either of those things, it's hard to make the leap. And so you can, it's all learnable, but you have to recognize that, and then you have to decide that you want to. Yeah. So culture shaping is interesting, but anyhow, that might be a time where both parties recognize that it's not quite a fit, and conscious uncoupling might be a method that they would want to use to, without blame, release each other back into the world of labor to decide, what their next step is, to find a better fit where they can have more joy, flourishing, achievement.
Can you talk more about some of the concrete steps? What's the process?
I don't think every organization can do it, because I think it needs to happen when the stage has been set. And so if an organization already has a culture of compassion, where there's empathy, and it's an easier fit because there's already trust, there's already maybe a culture of non-blaming or non-judgment. I think all of that creates a fertile environment for this practice. So, in an organization where there is not psychological safety and there's not trust and there's not compassion, if your boss comes and sits down with you and says, "Are you happy here?" you might not tell them the truth. But if there's a relational culture where people truly care and respect each other, and they sit down and they say, you don't seem happy. You might be open to telling them,
So it needs to be the right dynamic.
Yeah, I think, also if the culture has habits around collaboration, because cultures where there's true collaboration, they've got norms around what that means. So the essentials of collaboration are really truthfulness and listening and self-awareness and curiosity. All of that is baked into a culture of collaboration. But if it's not a culture of collaboration, there might be ego and rigidity and defensiveness. Those are characteristic enemies of collaboration. So my point being, I think this process will work pretty well in healthy cultures where there's compassion and trust and non-blaming and collaboration.
I think about with collaboration, the definition being mutually very assertive about what you want, and also very cooperative.
It's true.
And helping the other person get what they want.
Yeah.
So in order to make this work, that makes sense that you would need that.
Yeah.
Okay. So once the stage is set, then perhaps there's a bit of a process to move through this conscious uncoupling.
Mm-hmm. I love appreciative inquiry. The body of work that came out of Case Western in the 1980s, and it's such an elegant process, and I think you could use it. You can use it to frame so much, but it's really the 4Ds they call it, where the first D is to discover what is good already. So where are we amazing? Where is this relationship actually serving both of us? And is there something great here? And how can we focus on what's great about and what's serving both of us? So I think that's something to start with, is the first D. Then the second is dream, which is what could be. And then asking the question, having this collaborative conversation about, well, what could our relationship look like? What could be the container for this relationship that would allow you to flourish and us to flourish and all of us to continue growing? So I think the dreaming is the really creative part. Yeah. And then the third part is design, which is, well, what should be? So then you're really brass tacks getting down to, well, if you work 3 hours a week as a contractor from your house, blah, 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 then you're really getting down to design of it. And then the fourth is deploy, which is really, how do we execute this? Let's agree on the timeline. When are we going to shift the relationship to this new framework, this new container for the relationship? How are we going to get all of that out? And I think that part of the deploy is not just the timing, extremely clear roles and responsibilities for the next chapter, but also the messaging. Yeah. So what are we telling the team? What are you telling the team? What am I telling the team? Mm-hmm. What are we telling the clients? What are we telling the outside world? And getting consistent, but also making sure that messaging feels good to everyone. So I think that's a great tried and true process that works well for conscious uncoupling, appreciative inquiry, and with the focus on, when you get to the execution, making sure that the messaging is clear.
It sounds clear, and I wonder what do we do about the emotional part of this? Because I think it helps to have a process, but there's still the emotional component. There's still pain of uncoupling that is
human. Yeah. If everyone is well steeped in the work of William Bridges and transition management, I think it will help everything go much more smoothly. So again, it kind of goes back to the first part about what's normal in the culture. If it's a culture that understands transition management and that human beings, when they go through change, experience certain characteristic emotions. And so in the letting go phase, there are certain emotions. In the neutral zone, the wilderness, as Mike McKenna calls it, the trough of despair. I love it. Not dramatic at all. And then the new beginning phase, that there are certain emotions that you're just going to expect and they're normal. And so if both parties in the conscious uncoupling can recognize those emotions, know they're going to come, when they show up, welcome in and say, all right, sit down for tea, rage, here we go, let's have at it. And then knowing, how we keep moving. So I think that would be really healthy. I also think it's just really good to be realistic about relationships. And, just because I made a decision 5 years ago based on a set of criteria that were true at the time doesn't mean that that's true anymore. And things are always evolving and relationships are always changing. And, even with all of the best intentions, workplaces are so dynamic and layered, and there's chemistry that just changes with every new teammate. So just being realistically optimistic about relationships, but recognizing they are fluid. And I think it helps you be really grateful today for those relationships that are great. And it's sort of a mindfulness practice, isn't it? To say, these relationships are really strong today, and I'm really grateful for these. They might not be forever, but today I'm grateful for them. And I can't really know what the future holds. Yeah. It's hard.
Do you have any final words of wisdom for leaders out there who might be considering this?
Well, just as with anything, introducing the words and the language, and maybe laughing a little bit about, using Gwyneth Paltrow's language in the workplace for a little bit of levity, but then take from this idea what could be valuable. It won't work in every organization, but there may be pieces of it that you could adopt, and it might be healthier for everyone. So I think introducing the language would be my bit of advice.
Okay. Wonderful. I'm so grateful to you for being part of this movement of helping others in the workplace enhance individual and collective team performance. Thank you, listeners, for downloading The Behaviorist. We hope you'll subscribe. Please reach out to us through our website, workwisdomllc.com, where you can enjoy Work Wisdom Press and productions, ask questions, and even give suggestions of topics you'd like us to explore in future episodes. As is our custom, we'll leave you with a, Anthony DeMello story. Calamities can bring growth and enlightenment, said the teacher, and he explained it. Each day, a bird would shelter in the withered branches of a tree that stood in the middle of a vast, deserted plain. One day, a whirlwind uprooted the tree, forcing the poor bird to fly 100 miles in search of shelter, till it finally came to a forest of fruit-laden trees. And he concluded if the withered tree had survived, nothing would have induced the bird to give up its security and fly.